is Tom. Tom is at risk of poverty or social exclusion. This limits his opportunities to reach his highest potential by affecting his health and well-being and lowering his educational outcomes, which in turn reduces his opportunities to lead a successful life. However, Tom is not alone in this. 122.3 million Europeans were at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the EU in 2014. That is almost twice the size of the United Kingdom's population. Or, you can also see it as 1 in every 4 Europeans. The issue becomes even more concerning in Spain, where every third person is at risk. But then, what has been done about it? Well, the EU joined forces with its member states to make 2010 the European Year for combating poverty and social exclusion. They created the European Platform Against Poverty and Social Exclusion as part of the Europe 2020 strategy, designed to help reach the headline target of lifting 20 million people out of risk in 10 years. It is in this context that Eurostat's People at Risk of Poverty or Social Exclusion indicator was created.
This measurement of poverty and social exclusion requires a multidimensional approach, which is why the European Commission adopted this broad indicator to serve the purposes of the EU 2020 strategy. The AROPE indicator combines different measurements associated with distinct dimensions of poverty, as it englobes the rate of the population affected by at least one of the following: income poverty, severe material deprivation, or low work intensity. Income poverty considers the share of the population with an equivalized disposable income below the poverty threshold, set at 60% of the national median equivalized disposable income. Severely materially deprived people are those considered to be living in conditions greatly constrained by a lack of resources, who cannot afford at least 4 of the following: to pay rent or utility bills, keep home adequately warm, face unexpected expenses, eat meat, fish, or protein equivalents every second day, a week holiday away from home, a car, a washing machine, a color TV, or a telephone. Lastly, very low work intensity considers households where working-age adults work less than 20% of their total work potential during a year.
But now, how is the data collected? Every year, household members in every country in the EU are asked to complete a living conditions survey through an interview. These surveys are carried out by each country's National Statistical Institute. In fact, the NSIs collaborate with Eurostat under a partnership named the European Statistical System. In relation to income and living conditions, the ESS uses a framework called the European Union Statistics on Income and Living Condition, the EU SILC, which is crucial to ensure the high quality and comparability standards of the indicator. As you might well imagine, not the whole population is interviewed for the living conditions survey. Rather, the NSI selects a nationally representative sample of the population residing in private households within the country, irrespective of language, nationality, or legal residence status. Once all the data has been collected, NSIs need to deal with errors and validate the data. Then comes the time to calculate. A wide range of variables are put together to make up complex calculation algorithms for each specific indicator. The results obtained for income poverty, material deprivation, and low work intensity allow to measure the rate of people affected by AROPE. When Eurostat receives the national data, estimates at an aggregate level, for instance the EU 28, are calculated as the population-weighted arithmetic average of individual national figures. The AROPE indicator is collected and disseminated on an annual basis, and it refers to the year during which the survey was conducted.
The question is, what does the final outcome of the AROPE indicator really mean? The final value can take 2 different shapes, the first being the total number of people who are at risk of poverty or social exclusion in thousands, and the second, a percentage of the total population, which is more commonly used. Obtained values can't possibly be negative, and they can't take the values 0 nor 100. Instead, they tend to vary between a little over 10% and the low 60s, depending on the country and time being analyzed. In this sense, the value obtained gains relevance when compared between countries and over time. Citizen Lucy, for instance, would be much more likely to be at risk if she lived in Bulgaria, where 41% of the population is at risk, than in Iceland, where the rate is only 13%. As she would have also been at greater risk if she lived at the time of the Great Depression than in times of economic upheaval. Likewise, we can extract much information from the value by analyzing the relation between the 3 sub-indicators and by looking at the rates of risk of different groups of society.
As for every other indicator, there are numerous conveniences related to the AROPE rate. Firstly, this indicator gives a complete picture of poverty by taking into consideration qualitative variables, along with the classic quantitative ones. It is also a valuable academic weapon, as it is useful in helping to expand the idea of social research and highlight areas of social life that may be suitable for improvement. However, on the other hand, there are a series of issues of concern related to the AROPE indicator as well. The first of these is that the three sub-indicators would be encompassed inside the economic dimension of social exclusion, and thus it would seem desirable to expand the number of indicators used. Furthermore, by measuring poverty as an absolute and focusing only on how many people have a low income in relation with the rest of the population, the AROPE indicator gives an underrepresentation of the impoverishment over time. There is also a lack of transparency in the measurement of material deprivation, regarding who decides the 9 items and why. Finally, it is important to pinpoint that only people living in private households are considered. Therefore, people living in collective households and institutions are generally excluded from the target population, which leads to official data reporting fewer people at risk than there are in reality.
But let's stop talking about technical stuff and look at how the rate of risk has been evolving over these last years.
In the EU, the AROPE rate had been experiencing a decrease before the economic crisis as a result of an increment of salaries and of the purchasing power of families. However, in the year 2009, the impact of the financial crisis led to a sharp increase in unemployment and consequently in the number of people at risk for 3 full years. Post-crisis policy, largely concerned on the composition of revenues and expenditure, collaborated in altering the rising trend back to a fall by 2012. However, as you know, 1 in every 4 Europeans remained at risk in the EU in 2014. The evolution in Spain has been pretty similar to that of the EU over the past decade. Spain was one of the European countries to have experienced a higher increase in the number of people at risk between 2008 and 2014, mainly as a result of the wave of layoffs in the Spanish labour market, which caused climbs in the rates of low work intensity and material deprivation. Thus, almost 1 in every 3 Spaniards were at risk by the end of 2014. Germany's behaviour is completely opposite to what has already been seen. In Germany, the percentage of people at risk had slight propensity to growth before the arrival of the economic crisis. However, the crisis hit Germany later than the rest of Europe, and the share of people at risk was markedly lower for Germany than the European mean. In this sense, the German government has succeeded in adopting the necessary labour market reforms to avoid mass redundancies. This has allowed Germany to have already significantly exceeded its national poverty target. It must be noticed that both at the EU and at the national level, some groups of the population are at a higher risk compared with the average. Identified by Eurostat, the most affected include women, young people, and people out of work. For instance, in 2014, women remained at a higher risk than men, with 25.3% of women at risk and only 23.6% of men.
All in all, despite no net progress having been made in terms of the level of risk, there is no forecast of a rapid advancement in the situation. The European Commission anticipates that the number of people at risk might remain around 100 million by 2020. To ensure progress towards the target, the emphasis needs to shift from short-term measures to structural reforms to further spur economic growth, raise employment, and tackling world poverty, as well as to guarantee adequate levels of social protection and access to quality services. And we wonder, what will the consequences of this be on consumption? The capacity to consume is a crucial factor when it comes to both poverty and social exclusion. There is in fact a strong negative relation between the level of risk to which a person is exposed and his or her abilities to consume. Therefore, the greater the risk to which a person or household is exposed, the lower their ability to consume. We can conclude that consumption and thus economic growth can be stimulated by lowering the overall level of risk, which can be achieved through the implementations of effective policies and social protection. The achievement of the EU 2020 strategy would, in this sense, stimulate a growth in consumption. According to a model we created, if the poverty target were to be met, the following decrease in 23% of the AROPE indicator in 10 years would theoretically lead to an increase in 5% of the total consumption, which beneficial impact on the economy you can well imagine.
To wrap up the presentation, we'll conclude that Eurostat's at risk of poverty or social exclusion is the headline indicator to monitor the EU 2020 strategy target of lifting 20 million people out of risk. It measures the rate of the population affected by income poverty, material deprivation, or low work intensity. Throughout these past years, its evolution in Europe has been shaped by an important decrease during the economic crisis, which is finally back to a falling trend, leading to a rise in consumption. Overall, it seems very unlikely that the target will be met.